Yo, we all are familiar with loading states. Submitting a form or deleting something just takes some time. But imagine you can move quick. Imagine you don't need to wait at all. You wouldn't need a loading state, right? So usually you do an action like submitting a form. So you go from the client to the server and the server then calls the create item. Now this takes time, roughly about 200 to 500 milliseconds, because the server might not just create the item, but also revalidate everything so that you see the updated UI on the front end. So you get in success state back, and when everything is revalidated, you see it on the client. That is slow. Now let's just skip the part. You see it already here, create item is being called directly from the client. That's extremely fast, and that's the concept of optimistic UI or optimistic updates. And that's what I'm going to show you today. But somebody needs to pay my bills, so let's hear a quick word of today's sponsor. With AI, you can write code 10 times faster. But how can you make sure that your code is actually working and not just hallucinated? With tests. And nobody manages that better than Product Hunt winner TestSprite. You can integrate TestSprite seamlessly into your IDE of choice, like Cursor or Windsurf, and start shipping faster. TestSprite generates, executes, and maintains your test. They also have an MCP and everything you'd expect from a powerful AI testing solution. It is ideal for individual coders looking for self-serve test and small dev team lacking dedicated testing or QA talent. Start for free with the link in the description and level up if you need. Thanks to TestSprite for sponsoring this video. So as I already showed you, today it's going to get fast. So we have this simple to-do list here, just a simple to-do list. Like we can add to-dos, we can delete them. So we have a handle create to-do, handle delete to-do, and handle update to-do, and just some UI that is doing that. Nothing special at all. But there's one ugly problem that you will see when I move to a 3G network. I add a new to-do, like subscribe please, and we have a loading spinner, a loading state. And this video should show you how you can get rid of that. Because let's be honest, those loading states are ugly. How this works is pretty simple. We have this loading state and we set it to loading true before our expensive long taking action, and then we set it to false when it is finished. Very, very simple and straightforward here. So let's opt into optimistic updates or optimistic UI with the useOptimistic hook. So you can just import it from React, and what you basically do is you have your to-dos. My to-dos come from a page TSX. I just fetch them and pass them into this client component called to-do list. So I'm having these to-dos here. And now I use this useOptimistic hook, give it the first parameter, the to-dos, so the actual state, and the second parameter, what should happen when a new to-do, for example, is created. So I say, hey, I have this state and I have this new to-do, and let's merge them together into a bigger array, which then gets saved into the optimistic to-dos. That's the whole magic. And then when I actually create the to-do, I call create optimistic to-do right before this expansive create to-do. So when we now try to add something to our to-do list, we get an error. Because we miss one thing here. An optimistic state update occurred outside a transition or action. So we need to wrap the whole process in a transition. That's the concept of async React. So we actually need to call the start transition here and wrap the thing, so the create optimistic to do and the await create to do inside of a transition. So now if we try to add something, we see it happens instantly without any problem. And that's the beauty here. So as I already mentioned, this useOptimistic is a client-side React hook, because React hooks are always client-side. So you can't use it on a server side or in server components. It's just not working. So if you try to get this optimistic concept into server components, you will fail, because for updating a server component, you need a server round trip, and that's exactly what we want to avoid here. But what if await create to do actually returns an error? Let's take a look at it. We just call a simple promise here of 1 second, and then we throw an error. Back into our application, we click add to do, 1 second, and then it's just going away. So useOptimistic is already handling that for you. It already handles the rollback if something happens that shouldn't happen. But somehow, let's be honest, this feels buggy, or that just doesn't feel right. I don't get user feedback here. So what you should do is get a result here, see if the result is not a success, and then you can, for example, show a toast like that. So now when we try to add something and it doesn't work, we get a failed to add to do toast here. Nice. And then you can even get one step further, because CRUD operations are not just create. There's also read, but also update and delete. So maybe in your to-do list you want to update or delete a to-do. So how can you combine all these things together? So I have this example here now, and this is a extended example, just an idea. You would name this second function here a not a create optimistic to do, you would call it mutate optimistic to do. And now this second function gets a little complex because you have to pass it the actual action that you want to call. So you have this type create, type delete, type update. That's all custom. You can name that whatever you want. And then I have this simple switch with all these cases where I then decide what should happen optimistically. Like sure, when I create, I just append the action payload. When I delete something, I remove the element. And when I update, you know what I mean. And that's already it. Now I'm just calling mutate optimistic to do, for example, when creating, but also when deleting a to do, like mutate optimistic to do, then delete, and then the payload, which is for that case, the ID. And for the create case, it's the title and the completed state. You get the point. That's how you can get it working for create and for delete optimistically instant. But here I want to stop you. Don't jump into your project and implement optimistic updates everywhere, because there might be some use cases where this is not a good idea. For example, if the error rate is pretty high, let's say every second, every third call to your database is actually failing. That would be a bad user experience because they always have this rollback in their UI. Also, the code I showed here is pretty simple. Be aware of that. You need to have better logging, better observability at all, and you need to handle complex things like caching synchronization or revalidation synchronization. But let's be honest, optimistic UI just feels nice. So perfect, now your mutations are instant. But what about your navigations? They might be slow. So check out this video here and have a great day. Bye bye.